We got promoted because what? We were subject matter experts. We were really good at something. We were the best. We were the best accountant. We became the finance manager, right? We were the best salesperson. We became the sales manager. And so everything about us getting promoted was at some level about us having technical expertise.
Mm.
This is not saying that your past expertise isn't valuable. It's simply saying that it's not enough.
Welcome to Business Leaders Coach podcast, where we educate, equip, enable, and empower you to become the best leader that you can be. My name is Toye Oshunbiyi. I'm the founder of Business Leaders Coach, and in today's episode, I have got something really special for you. If you're a founder, a CEO, a leader trying to navigate change or uncertainty or just the daily chaos of business, then you need to hear this. So I sat down with Kevin Eikenberry, one of the most respected voices in leadership development. Kevin's written several best-selling books, and his latest one, Flexible Leadership, Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence, is all about how you and I can lead with intention when the world keeps shifting around us. And here's one thing. We all say that we want to be flexible. But what does that actually look like in practice? Well, Kevin breaks it down beautifully. He shares why mindset matters more than skill set and why most training fails without it. He also shares how to make decisions in complex and unclear situations using the Cynefin framework, which you get to find out what that is. And also what true leadership means when you don't have all the answers. So it's full of practical wisdom and real talk. And I believe this conversation is going to help you lead better, think clearer, and maybe even breathe a little easier. And if this kind of content helps you grow as a leader, then don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we've got more conversations like this coming your way, so we definitely want to make sure that you are well informed. But for now, grab a coffee or pop your headphones in and enjoy this episode with Kevin Eikenberry. Let's get into it. All right, Kevin, welcome to the show. And it's great to have you. Obviously, you've written a number of books. You're well known, a renowned leadership expert, a speaker and author. Leadership is obviously a very important topic and a subject that I'm sure you're passionate about. So maybe we can find out a bit of background about you. Why is leadership such an important topic that you've made it sort of a life purpose?
Well, so first of all, thanks for having me. And expert is a strong word. I mean, I'm always honored when people say it. I'd like to hope that I'm continuing to learn and because at some level, when you become an expert, you stop learning, and I hope that that's true. I hope that that's not true. So, the question of why this kind of work, it's a good question and it's a fair question, and I would say that ultimately, I grew up on a farm, and I grew up in farm related businesses, and so I always had a desire to have my own company and not just work for someone else, which I did for several years. Had a fabulous experience working for Chevron, and while I was there, I found myself in the training and development world, and it was there that I figured out, well, this is the kind of work I want to do ultimately. And so the combination of I want to start a company, or I want to have a company. And then I figured out what that would be, right? Some people are entrepreneurs and they want to start companies.
Yes.
I wanted to find a company that could be a part of my life. And that's what I found. And what I found relatively early is that I was pretty good at helping other people learn stuff. And over time, that didn't take that long, I figured out that the place that I was at my best and could have the biggest impact was when I was helping people learn skills that were both life skills and work skills. And so the intersection of leadership and life is like, well, I believe that when we become better humans as we become better leaders, and vice versa.
Mm,
So that was sort of the skill side of the table, but the mission side of the table is that the world is a better place only when people lead.
mm,
Like, so if we can help in our company, if we can help leaders
mhm,
get better, we can help the world be a better place. That's
mm.
why we're
Brilliant. And so, just so that everybody who's listening can understand your context of leadership, how would you define leadership?
here. I would define leadership as reaching valuable outcomes with and through others. That leadership is always about reaching an outcome that we probably don't have yet. Otherwise, we wouldn't be leading.
Mm,
We'd already be there. And you're not doing it by yourself, you do it with others.
mm.
And the other thing I would say about leadership is that there is both small L and capital L leadership.
Yeah.
Capital L leadership is leadership by position.
Mm,
And small L leadership is we're leading when people are following. Ultimately, that's all leadership.
mm.
Leadership is a verb, not a noun. It's
Yeah.
something that we do. And if people are following, we're leading. But there
Mm,
is a difference between having the position and not having the position.
mm.
And so the largest percentage of our work is in the context of folks who have positional authority.
Obviously, you've written the book Flexible Leadership, Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
So, why the flexible leadership?
lots of reasons.
Mm,
The biggest, most important reason is that second in the subtitle of the book is that word uncertainty,
yeah.
and there's certainly plenty of that in our world. And it's my belief, and I try to make the point in the book and perhaps in this podcast, that until we can be flexible, we're going to have a really hard time dealing with navigating uncertainty. That flexibility is the way that we can ride the waves of uncertainty to improve the chances for us and for our teams and therefore our organization to be more successful within that moment. Think about it this way.
Mm,
If we never change the way we lead, let's just go back, say, 5 years.
mm.
Just happenstance, 5 years ish ago, we weren't thinking about COVID, right?
Yeah.
So let's just take the beginning of 2020 before we any of us had heard of COVID, and we think about how we were leading then. And if we haven't changed how we lead at all,
Mm,
and the world has changed around us, has the world conspired to move closer and closer to the way in which we lead? That's not likely. I wouldn't
mm,
take that bet.
mm,
So that means if the world is changing, then we must be willing to flex in the face of or in the context of that change.
mm,
And so it's very important, I think, that we're talking about what we flex and what we don't flex, though. And
mm.
I'm happy to talk about that if you'd like.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I can see that in the book, the way you structured it, you're speaking my language. You talked about the mindset, the skill set, the habit set, which, is I like that idea about starting off with the mindset. But maybe you can give us a bit of context about why you structured it that way, even.
Sure. So, if you do the work that we do, training, coaching, speaking, writing, you're typically the focus is on skills. And an
Mm,
organization hires us or hires anyone that does the things that we do to try to help people have a new skill set, build a new
mm,
skills. Here's the
mm,
skills that our people need. We hear that all the time. We say that all the time.
mm,
Awesome. If if people's mindset doesn't match that skill set, it doesn't matter. Like someone can intellectually learn a skill
yeah.
and even physically learn a skill, but they're not going to apply the skill. It's not going to become a habit set unless the mindset matches it on the front end. So the whole idea of saying I want to be a flexible leader, or excuse me, to teach the skills of flexible leadership. If the person says, "Well, the best leaders are consistent, the best
Mm,
leaders are stable, the best leaders are solid," if that's my belief, that's my mindset.
mm,
Doesn't matter what you teach me about being flexible because it doesn't match my view. And it's
mm,
unlikely that I'm going to change. Or specifically to flexible leadership, if I believe I have a leadership style, I have a set of strengths, this is how I lead, then why would I think about wanting to be flexible? It's
mm,
irrelevant. because I already have that figured out. So we have to get the mindset right on the front end. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with saying I want to be stable and consistent. We should be stable and consistent on our principles and our purpose and our values, but we must, I believe, be flexible on our approaches, on our how. And so we've got to get the skill set, excuse me, the mindset to match the skill set. But the second problem is, and we've all experienced this, we've been to training, we've gotten the stuff, we got some new tools in our tool belt, right? They're bright and shiny. We might even leave excited about having them on our tool belt. And then we get back, and I'm using back as if we went to something physically, which isn't always the case, but you can follow my logic. We get back from the learning experience with these new tools, and then we get back in the real world and we go to our habit. So unless we build the habit set, those skills that we gained will just get dusty or rusty.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely. I've seen that a lot. I had the opportunity to train thousands of leaders in the organization I worked with prior to starting my own business, and that's what I noticed, which is that they'll come out 2 days of maybe training, and they're like, "This is great, we're going to apply it," and then they get back into the real world, and before you know it, they've gone back to type. And there was that always that saying from the other maybe team members, "Oh, they've gone to training. Look at, just give them 2 weeks," you know. And so that's why I'm with you. I realize that you have to shift people's perspective first. They've got to see things differently. They've got to buy into the new paradigm. I know those are not words that you use, but it'd be interesting to know
But I
how.
certainly could, right? Like if that doesn't match, if the mindset and the skill set don't match, you've got no shot
Yeah,
at habit set. There's still other challenges to get to habit set, but if you don't have the first two in alignment, you got no
yeah.
shot.
Yeah, yeah. So, how can we help? So, some of the listeners are CEOs, founders, those are my audience. How would you make such a leader choose to shift their mindset to become a flexible leader?
Well, I don't think we can make them.
Okay.
What I think, I
Or
mean,
help.
yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying that to pick on you. I'm saying that to say that our words here matter. And I'm really saying that to the audience, not to you. That as a CEO, as a senior leader, you may be thinking, well, I just got to make them. I just got to get them. How do I get them there? Well, we have to help them discover it. In other words, we can't control their mindset at all. We can certainly influence it. And I would say the thing that we could do. So first, we have to realize that this is an influence conversation, right? Not a control conversation. So we can't make them. But how can we improve the odds that that's the choice they will make? Because it is a choice. And so I love that word. How do I? You asked, how do I help them make the choice? And the choice is the right word. It's just that the choice is theirs. And so the single most important first thing that we can do as a CEO, senior leader, or a leader at any level, if we're trying to influence others to make a choice, is to model it. So don't just say, "Hey, I want you to be more flexible. I want you to be more flexible," and you just lean into your same style all the time. Not likely gonna work, right? So the first thing we've got to do is model it. The second thing we've got to do is start talking about this set of mindsets that you and I are starting to unpack a little bit. Like we have to, I believe that the first step toward flexible leadership is intention. So having an intention to recognize that maybe the way I've done it, or my natural inclination, or my style might not be best in this particular moment, in this particular context. So starting to have those kinds of conversations, talking about, well, what does this depend on? Like that's the thing that people often talk about. Like it depends. Well, what does it depend on? Let's talk about that rather than just doing what comes natural.
And what kind of feedback would they get in order to be able to start to think or rethink that I need to be flexible?
Well, the first thing I would lean into is questions, and I'd probably lean into reflective questions or debriefing types of questions, right? So, okay, so here's how that went last time. What does this remind you of? Well, it reminds me of this. How did that go? What worked that time? What didn't work? What would you do? Thinking about that situation, what would you do? What might you do differently if you could do that again? this might be your chance to do it again. How would you do it differently here or now? So the the most effective we can be here as a coach is to ask them questions that helps them think about the context of the current situation. And maybe, what does it remind me of? Pattern recognition. What does it remind me of from the past? What worked or didn't work there? How might I apply it here? Because a lot of times we'll come at a situation, look at it later and say, man, if I'd have only known that, I'd have done some stuff differently. Right? The dominoes fell in different directions than I expected them to. Okay. How do I use that? How do I use that insight another time when I see a situation that is similar to that? How do I use that not to just replicate, but to help inform me or give me a better picture of the context of the current situation?
Okay, I get that. So, obviously, we're speaking the language of coaching and training frameworks, right? So maybe you can share with our audience what's the framework that they need to understand in order to be able to see the mindset, how that works.
Right. So I've outlined one third of what I call the flexible leadership approach. That's
Yeah,
intention. Next
yeah.
is context, which I hinted at, and the third is flexors. I'm sure we'll get to flexors, but let's talk about that context because we use a framework in the book. I imagine this
Yeah,
is where you're headed. We
yeah.
use a framework in the book that I borrowed from a gentleman named Dave Snowden, a really super smart and wise guy who created a framework called the Cynefin framework.
Never.
And he created this framework to help understand the context of situations. And it's really been used most often sort of at the very big, sort of societal, organizational level. And he basically says there are four kinds of contexts. We tend to treat things like one of two. And in our world today, those are probably the least likely two of the four. What I've tried to do here is help us use this framework on a more personal, immediate, smaller term view. And hopefully that's one of the things I brought to the world with this work. And so the Cynefin framework has four contexts: clear, complicated, complex, and chaotic. And Snowden would say, and I would now agree, that what we often will say, well, things are chaotic. They rarely really are. They're more likely complex or perhaps complicated than being truly chaotic. But what most of us tend to think of is that the situation or the context we're in is clear. Like the knowns are known, the outcomes are, we can figure them out. There's clear cause and effect. We have clear experience with this. We have a best practice. We have a process. Like that's how we have treated work and leadership for a very long time. That's why we can say, well, this is my style. This is what I'm going to do. It's a clear context. Things are relatively simple. It's somewhat straightforward. Now, the more I talk about this, don't you feel like, well, that's really not how my world actually is? Our world is much more likely, and the situations that we find ourselves in as a leader are more likely to be complicated, which would be different in that there may be things we could figure out, but we don't have all the data. We don't have the expertise. There are things we don't know that maybe we can figure out or we can get some information about, but we still don't really know. There's a level of uncertainty. But complex context is, well, there's things we don't even know that we don't know. It's that situation when you look back at it later. So, well, if I'd have known that,
Yeah.
right? So a whole lot of our work is complex. There are multiple things pulling on things at all times. The world is not ordered. It's more unordered. And so there is complexity at every turn. And if we're going to lead in that time, we have to lead differently than if the situation is clear. And that's the biggest idea of the framework.
So, can you give us an example of where a leader can navigate through this framework so that they can know
Sure. First
which,
thing is to
yeah,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, so that they can know where to sort of position the situation that they're in.
So the first thing is to understand the framework so that you can start to look at a situation and say, well, where does it fit? It's sort of like thinking about it like a map, right? Like if I put you in the wilderness and say, get out of here, the first thing you're going to say to me is, well, I need a map. But a lot of people, I've asked this question, lots of people say, well, I need my phone with GPS. I said, there's no cell signal. Well, then I want a map. Okay. The framework is a map. Because once we know where we are, we can start to move more with some more level of confidence about what to do. Even if it's uncertain, we can at least say, okay, we at least know this. And so given that, we're going to walk this direction. Or we're going to ask in the context of leadership, maybe I need to ask more questions. Maybe I need to bring out more from others. Maybe we need to try and test some things. Maybe we can't know. So what do we do? Like, how do I lean into the perspectives of others, perhaps? But if the context is clear, you don't need many of those things. Mostly what you need is to lean into the expertise that you might have, or to look at the work process and say, this is how we're going to do it. And so I would think of the way we use it is to think of it like a map and say, what does the situation I'm facing look like? And given that, the book gives you a bunch of ideas about what you can then do based on where you are from a context perspective.
And is this something that the leader, let's say a leader's running their team, is it something that they would do with their team?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
facilitate.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, again, my proposition is that most of or far more of the context that we find ourselves in is complicated or complex than it once was, which is why we need the input, the commitment, the perspective of our teams, right? So for 25 years, let's just say, the pendulum of leadership development has been moving toward, well, we want people to be committed, we want people to be accountable, we want people to take ownership, we need to engage them. Like that's been the direction we've been moving. And I would say that while that's been useful from a human dynamics perspective, as long as there have been humans, it's become more important in the workplace as the work has become less clear and more complicated and complex. And so understanding this map helps you say, well, that all just makes sense. Here's the thing, though. It isn't that now we no longer ever need to make a decision as a leader. It isn't that there's never a time for us to take charge. It just means that more of our situations will be better served if we don't simply make a decision, take charge, take control. There's still a time and a place for that when the situation is truly chaotic or truly clear. It's just that there's less of the time that's like that than has ever been the case.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that there is a mindset shift, especially if the leader's perspective is, as a leader, I should have all the answers. You know, there's some people who come from that narrative, but from what you're sharing, that has to shift, that the answers perhaps will be found within the team collaboratively based on the situation at hand. And you become sometimes more of a facilitator of bringing out the answers collectively. That's sort of what I'm hearing. Would that be more or less?
Things about that. Two things about that. The first one is, if you're sitting there sort of pointing your finger at other leaders saying they need to hear this because they're the ones that are acting like that, like they have all the answers, etc. Let's stop and grant a little grace. Because let's think about all of us as capital L leaders. We got promoted because what? We were subject matter experts. We were really good at something. We were the best. We were the best accountant. We became the finance manager, right? We were the best salesperson. We became the sales manager. And so everything about us getting promoted was at some level about us having technical expertise. And so it's not hard to understand why we feel like we're supposed to have. Maybe that's our job. We're supposed to be that person. So I want to grant grace to you if you feel that, if you feel convicted by this conversation, but also if you're like wanting to throw stones at somebody else here, slow down. Like, this is the human element of this, and it's a really important one. Sometimes we think that's what we're supposed to do as a leader. That's the kind of leaders we've seen before. And what I'm trying to help us do is to put an and in here.
Mm.
This is not saying that your past expertise isn't valuable. It's simply saying that it's not enough, right? And while I love the word facilitate that you used a second ago, the idea of how do I facilitate it from the group, that also doesn't mean that your input doesn't matter. It
Mm.
just means it can't go first, right? Because if
Mm.
the boss goes first, there's nothing else for anyone to say. Let's just be honest,
Mm.
right? Unless there's a tremendous level of trust on that team.
Mm.
So I don't want if you struggle with that tension of, but I thought I was supposed to be the expert. I thought that's what it was expected of me. I had a leader who I really looked up to who was extremely expert. You don't need to ignore all that.
Mm.
You just can't lean into it 100%, right? The tension here is between answering and asking. And I can lean too far into answering and I
Mm.
can lean too far into asking. Have you ever had someone that you asked a question of and they wouldn't give you an answer? All they did was ask you more questions.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
the
that's
ends of that
frustrating.
spectrum, neither end of that spectrum is helpful or
Mm.
as helpful as understanding the tension between them and being willing to move and shift
Mm.
between them, even if it's not comfortable initially.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, I get that. And just as you were talking, one more question came up in this area of the mindset, which is now part of your book, talks about confidence. And as you were talking, I was thinking, well, I'm playing this in my mind. Somebody who's listening to this thinking, yeah, but that's how I derive my confidence because that's, you get my point. So yeah, can you just speak to that person who's thinking, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Like
Yeah.
I place my confidence in my past experience and
Yeah.
expertise.
Yes.
Yes, and right in a world that's more uncertain, we certainly intuitively know that
Hmm.
our expertise might not be enough,
Hmm.
but we don't know what to do with that,
Hmm.
right? So the idea of the flexible leadership approach, and now I've hinted at the third piece of that, these flexors, by just
Hmm.
talking about asking and answering as being an example of that, is if I now know that the world is perhaps more complicated or complex, I can derive confidence from knowing what actions I might take then, right? So, what I'm trying to do with the book is give you tangible and practical things to try shifting based on what you see in front of you, rather than see our confidence is derived from our habits, which is based on the assessments we've taken, the
Hmm.
stuff we've tried, the things we've been taught. It's our natural responses. And those are seductive. And they're also very helpful until they're not,
Hmm.
right? So, what we need to do is build our confidence in our ability to flex. And that becomes the new area that becomes the new habit, the habit of being able to flex. And
Hmm.
as we build that habit, we'll build our confidence in that, just like we built our confidence in our past expertise, etc.
Hmm. So let's talk about the skill set part, and I'm sure also people hearing consistency, and at the same time they're hearing adaptability. I know that I've worked with a CEO a few years ago where when I spoke to many of the teams, they were like, well, we never get to the end of everything. We're always changing. Before we start this project, and the next thing we've moved to something else. So could you just help people understand, because it does sound a bit like a dichotomy of consistency, but then also there's this flexibility or adaptability. Maybe you can just help people to understand what
Yeah,
you mean by this.
yeah, it's a really important question. So here's the thing: it's it's not a dichotomy. It's a symbiotic relationship that we can be both flexible and consistent. And you say, well, what do you mean? Well, it may be like I can look out a window right now and I can see a tree, and you can certainly see one in your mind's eye. Just
Hmm.
see a mature tree in your mind's eye right now. And you can say this about that tree: it is consistent, it is stable, it's not moving, it's rooted. But if there's any breeze at all, that tree is also flexible. Pliant is actually a synonym for flexible. Like it's moving in the breeze and yet the tree's not going anywhere. That's the metaphor for us as leaders, rooted in our principles, rooted in our purpose, rooted in our values, flexible in our approach. Everything we've talked about so far has been about the how of leading, not the what and why, the how. We must move to be more flexible with the how in a world that's changing. Consider that the wind, if you will. And that's what we need to be willing and able. So willing and able, mindset, skill set, right, to flex in the times of uncertainty without losing our core, without losing our purpose, without losing our values. It's both and. Flexible leadership is both and leadership, not either or. It's not this or this. It's not outcomes or others. It's not asking or answering. It's asking and answering. It's outcome and others. It's consistent and flexible. And finding where between those two, this is what I call a flexor, finding where I need to be between those two in this context. When I look at the map of the situation, rather than just doing what comes natural to me.
Yeah. So can you give us an example of somebody that you've maybe worked with that has come in, adopted this, and been able to navigate through, just so that people can understand what this then looks like in context?
Sure. I think that the way to think about that question isn't rather than say, here's a person that's perfect at all of it, but to look at situations where any of us might have been successful at doing it. So I'm gonna turn your question just a little bit, and I'm gonna give all of you a personal example for yourself. There's been a time, and I hinted at this a second ago. There's been a time when someone brought you a problem, or you were aware of a problem, or someone was looking for advice from you, or whatever the situation exactly is. And you started to respond, and then you said, well, wait a minute, it depends. And you thought, well, it depends on this and this and this. And then perhaps you did something slightly different than you would have done otherwise. Because as you thought about that context a little bit more, you said, well, I'm not sure what my first reaction would be my best choice. Our better choice might be to do this. Or if we do this, it would address 2 or 3 different things. Don't know really what's going on here, but it could be this, it could be this. Let's try this. And if what you try, first of all, if you took the time to think about that, you were already being flexible. And if you took the time, if you then chose to do something different or even slightly different from your first natural response, you've been a flexible leader. So I believe all of us have done it, right? What I want to help us do is make that our modus operandi, that becomes our first inclination. This does not mean that we have to overanalyze everything. This does not mean that everything needs to stop and wait for us to take 3 days. What it means is for us to be intentional. For us to be intentional about what I know. I don't know everything. Based on what I do know, what gives us the best chance of success here? Because there's not a single right answer. It's both and, right? So how do I improve my odds based on the approach that I take here? And I believe that all of us have done that at least a little bit.
Yeah, I absolutely, especially with that example so that's the reason why I guess it turns into more, how do we make this habitual? And so what are the ways of how people can make this more because you have to be intentional. So how would you encourage people to intentionally begin to make this habitual?
Well, the good news is that in the last 15 years, we've learned a lot about how habits are formed and how habits are changed. And there's been 2 or 3 really great books written about this that have taken the research and made it real for all of us. And James Clear's Atomic Habits, probably the most famous of those. I talk about some of James's work in the book,
Mhm.
but without rehashing that, let's just say this: the first thing that we have to do to change a habit is to stop when we think we're going to go into habit, right? We have to have a trigger to stop us to say, well, wait a minute, that's the it depends moment, as we talked
Mm.
about it a second ago. Say, oh, that's the first thing, right? And then the second thing is have a bank of experience to look at to help us decide what to do next. And it doesn't mean, well, what have I done before? But
Mm.
what worked or didn't work when I did that before, as we talked about a few minutes ago. And so I think being intentional about wanting to change the habit, having a trigger to stop myself long enough before I just go into habit. And then number three, practicing flexing. So if we do those three things, and in the book,
Mhm.
I identify 19 flexors. I've
Okay.
talked about two of them here, outcomes and others, and asking and answering. It does not mean that you have to go get better at 19 things all at once, because that's not going to work.
Mm.
What I suggest in the book is, after you get a sense of how each of those flexors match up against the context framework that we've discussed, pick one or two. Maybe pick one or two that really resonate with you as you read,
Mm.
or pick one or two that you're pretty sure you're pretty inflexible on right now. Pick one or two to start with to try. And what you'll find is, as you start to build the muscle of flexing, you'll be better able to flex in other areas as well. You'll start to see it showing up for you a lot more often than it being sort of an academic exercise.
Mm. Yeah, and the other thing that you mentioned in the book that I want to highlight, because as you know, a lot of leadership training will involve some kind of personality profiling, disc, I use tetramap, different things.
Yep.
And I think you
Yep.
mentioned about how it's easy to then define that as your leadership style. Yeah, could you just speak to that
Yeah,
audience so that they can understand
for
how
sure.
this, yeah, plays in?
So we have a disc assessment that we sell every day. There are plenty of those disc being in the public domain, and there's other models that are based in the same
Mm.
foundational stuff with
Mm.
colors or animals. And there's Myers Briggs, and there's
Yeah.
Strength Finder, and we can extend this out beyond just like any sorts of leadership styles. Well, I'm a facilitative leader. I'm a servant leader. Like wherever whatever blanket you want to put over this question. Here's the thing: really smart people with really great intentions have built these models.
Mm.
And they built these models to help us better understand ourselves in the world so we can be more effective in it, whether it's to communicate, whether it's to lead, whatever. The intention behind all of it is awesome.
Mm.
And all models are built to help us get our arms around a complex world. Like, human behavior is extraordinarily complex. And so we put letters, you started with discs, so I'll stay there, D, I, S, and C,
Mm.
around a person's behavior to help us understand that behavior better. Great. Until we start to oversimplify, right? So a model is a simplification of the real thing. But then when we say, well, then I have a lot of D traits, or I
Mm.
say, well, I'm a high D.
Mm.
Now we've taken something that was simplified and oversimplified it and made it our identity. And once we make it our identity, whether it's one letter, one color, four letters, or a label,
Mm.
once we've made it our identity, then it becomes our chance to explain things,
Mm.
oversimplify things, and
Mm.
keep us from flexing. Because, well, listen, that's just I'm a high D. That's how
Mm.
I wasn't being direct. I wasn't being blunt. I was just being
Yeah, I
direct.
said,
You
yeah.
just have to get used to that.
Mm.
No, 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 no. Right? That is overusing the
Mm.
tool, making it something it's not, was never really truly meant to be.
Mm.
And that's when it gets in our way in
Mm.
lots of ways, including keeping us from being flexible. Because now we expect and we excuse our behavior because that's who I am.
Yeah, yeah. So not to define yourself by it, even though it could give you it can give you data that, okay, this is how you behave in default mode. That's what I was used to use that language.
Yeah,
That's a starting
100%.
point, but you got to flex. You got to actually, yeah, it's funny. Lean into the middle, move towards, or depending on who you're working with, so that you can
Flex towards
engage
them,
with.
right? So
Yeah,
let's
flex.
just take
Yeah,
this for a second, right?
yeah,
Like if I have a lot of I and D traits, which I do, and I when we teach the model, we teach it to understand it so I can see the behaviors of others so I can move in their direction. It's not
yeah,
changing who I am.
yeah,
It's helping me communicate with them better because I'm communicating with them in ways that work better for them.
yeah,
So I need to not just do what I do, but how do I flex? If I'm communicating with someone with a lot of C traits, then I probably need to give them a little more detail. I
yeah,
probably need to give them a little more time to respond. I probably need to do those things rather than shaking my head and saying, why don't they say something? Because that's what I would do.
yeah, yeah,
But to use that model as a tool to enable me to perhaps communicate better with people when I see certain things.
This is
That's
brilliant.
flexing. That's
Yeah,
flexing.
yeah, yeah. Much needed, much needed. First time we spoke, I mentioned VUCA. I know you said that it didn't come up, but this is really, I think, it's timely because of the way the world is going. So as we begin to wrap up, Kevin, just a question. So, what's something about flexible leadership that you would wish more leaders understood early in their journey?
Um, many of us, for some of the reasons we talked about earlier, spend an awful lot of time trying to find the right answer. Well, there's got to be a right answer. That we'd be better off spending more time trying to find the best answer for the current situation. Because in a world that's not clear, that's complicated or complex, there probably isn't a single right answer, like 2 + 2 = 4. But rather, what are some answers that we think improve the chances we can get good results? Or at least things we can try that might help us see our way forward with more data now to make new decisions next.
Oh, that's brilliant. That is brilliant. Kevin, this has been a packed uh, session. Just hearing your wisdom and, more importantly, your actionable insights. I want to thank you for walking us through this flexible framework. This, I think, is so timely, as I said, because the people that I'm working with, it's like, how do I navigate through this? You've really dropped some great insights into how we can start to lead in a world that is uncertain. And so, how can listeners find out more and connect with you, get your book, etc.?
Well, if you can remember how to spell my name, KevinEikenberry. If you can put that into the big old Google machine, trust me, you'll find me. But you go to kevineikenberry.com, that's all about our company. If you go to Kevin Eikenberry and find me on LinkedIn, I'd love to be connected. Let me know, say hello, connect with me, tell me where you found me, that you found me on the Business Leaders Coach podcast. If you want to learn more about the book, you can go to kevineikenberry.com/flexible. You'll find all about stuff about the book, how you can get bonuses if you buy multiple copies, all those sorts of things, and get a sample chapter. But I have one other thing I want to share with everybody as a gift because you listened to this conversation, or at least you fast forwarded to the end. If you go to kevineikenberry.com/gift, I want to gift you our remarkable masterclass that I recorded all about building our confidence and the confidence in others. We hinted at confidence a little bit today. So I have this masterclass that I created that I want to gift you. We sell it for $79, but it's free to you if you go to kevineikenberry.com/gift. I hope you'll do that. If you want to buy a copy of the book, we'd love for you to do that. Buy it either by going to kevineikenberry.com/flexible or wherever you buy books. But please go take advantage of the gift as well.
All right. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for spending time with us today. And for listeners who want to take this deeper, as he said, check out Flexible Leadership. You'll be able to get it on all your bookstores. And There you go. And there'll be a link in all of Kevin's work in the show notes. And if there's one thing that I'll mention is that flexibility isn't about being reactive; it's about being responsive with intention. And I think that's what I've taken away from today. So thank you, Kevin, for sharing with us today.
It was a pleasure to have you. That was a great way to close.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for tuning in to Business Leaders Coach. And if today's episode challenged you or inspired you, share it with a fellow leader. And don't forget to subscribe, and see you next time. Thank you.